She stood at my front door with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and tears she hadn't earned sitting in her eyes. Her hair, always so carefully styled for magazine covers and red carpets, was tied back in a limp bun, her face bare. She looked older, smaller. The kind of broken you only get from watching everything you built burn down in front of you. Still, I didn't move to hug her. Not at first. She said my name like it was fragile. Mom. Just that. One word, one syllable, and suddenly the walls I'd built over the last 5 years rattled like they might fall, but they didn't. I stayed standing in the doorway, one hand on the knob, one on my hip. Not cold, not cruel, just waiting. She looked past me like she expected to see the house I used to have, warm, busy, full of pictures. But those had all come down. All the photos, all the little tokens of her childhood I used to dust weekly like relics, gone. The living room was spare now, clean, quiet, mine. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her voice cracked, and I could hear that old charm trying to bubble up from underneath the exhaustion. That winning, breathy lilt she used in boardrooms and interviews when she needed something. But it didn't work on me anymore. I opened the door wider and stepped aside. Not an invitation, not forgiveness, just gravity. She walked past me slow, like she wasn't sure how her legs were still moving. She sat at the kitchen table without asking. The same chair my father died in months before the stroke. The same place I waited for her after every birthday she missed. "I don't have anyone else," she whispered. I put the kettle on. Not for her, for me. The ritual kept my hands busy, kept my voice quiet. I didn't ask what happened, didn't ask why she came. She would tell me when she was ready, or she wouldn't. Either way, I'd survived more painful silences. She rubbed her palms on her jeans like she wanted to wash them clean. "Everything's gone, Mom. The company. My team. They froze my assets. People are suing. I didn't know where else to go. I poured the water over the tea bag and let it steep. Jasmine. Her favorite. I didn't mean to grab it. Habit dies slower than love." She kept talking. She told me about the scandal, about the ex-COO who'd flipped on her, about the journalists clawing at her past, twisting every word she ever said. She said she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't even look at herself some mornings. I listened. That's all. I didn't reach for her hand. I didn't ask if she was okay. Because 5 years ago, I wasn't okay either, and she hadn't asked me then. She'd blocked my number the day after her company hit $70 million in valuation. Told her assistant to communicate on her behalf. I got Christmas cards signed by interns. My birthday passed like it didn't exist. When my sister died, she didn't come to the funeral. Too much press, she'd texted. People might follow me. And when I had my gallbladder removed, she didn't call, so I let her talk. Eventually, her voice cracked. She said I just need a place to stay, just for a few days. I'll figure it out. I promise. I sipped my tea. It was too hot. It burned the back of my throat. I welcomed the pain. At least it was honest. She looked around, her eyes landing on the blank wall where her high school graduation photo used to hang. The one with her in the white robe holding her diploma like she'd caught the moon. She noticed it was gone. And in that moment, her face changed. Just slightly. A flicker of something unfamiliar. Maybe regret. Maybe realization. "Where's all the photos?" she asked. I finished my tea and placed the cup gently in the sink. The steam had fogged up the kitchen window. I reached out and wiped a circle clean with my palm, revealing the pale blue morning outside. "I took them down," I said. Why, she asked too fast, her voice sharp for a second, almost like a child being told her favorite toy was gone. I turned back to her, looked her in the face for the first time in 10 minutes. Because they started to feel like proof I'd imagined it all. She didn't respond. Her lips pressed into a thin line and her shoulders curled in like the truth had taken something from her. It was nearly noon, but the light in the room still felt like morning's soft gray, uncertain. She asked again quietly this time, "Can I stay here, Mom?" I walked over to the counter and took out one plate, one knife, one slice of toast. I placed it in front of her. "Eat first," I said. "We'll see after that." And then I sat across from her, not as her mother, but as the woman she left behind. When she was 6, she came home from school with a note from her teacher pinned to her sweater. "Emily spoke up for another student today," she told the class. "My mama says everyone deserves a seat at the table." I kept that note in my wallet for 12 years. That's who she used to be. Back when she still held my hand crossing the street when she whispered secrets into my ear and asked if the moon could hear us. When we slept curled together in one twin bed because the heater broke again and I couldn't afford a repair. She'd press her cheek to mine and say, "This is better than warm. This is us." I gave her everything I had. I was 19 when I had her. Her father left 2 weeks before her first birthday, walked out after his shift and never came home. Left behind an unpaid power bill, 3 moldy floorboards, and one photograph of him holding her in the hospital. I burned it the night the repo man took the car. I worked 2 jobs for most of her childhood. Factory work during the day, sewing uniforms for men who wouldn't know my name and cleaning offices after dark. I walked miles between shifts. My shoes wore through every 4 months. She never saw that part. I made sure of it. She saw pancakes with powdered sugar on Saturdays, saw birthday cakes made from scratch and hand-sewn Halloween costumes with details I stayed up all night to finish. She saw joy even when I was drowning in fatigue. When she was 12, she came down with pneumonia. I sat by her hospital bed for 4 days straight, watching the rise and fall of her breath like it was the sun itself. I prayed for the first time in years, promised I'd never let anything hurt her. I remember thinking, take me instead. Take my bones, my breath, anything but her. She got better, and I kept my promise. I didn't date much, couldn't afford the risk of distraction. The only man I let near us for more than a season was Robert, a kind man with a crooked smile who worked in the mailroom at the university. He used to bring Emily little notebooks and colored pens, but when she told me she didn't like how he looked at her when she wore her leotard after dance class, I ended it that same night. No questions, no hesitation. Her safety, her comfort, that was the law of the house. She got into Stanford on a scholarship. I screamed when she called. She cried. I cried, and then we just sat on the line breathing like we'd climbed the mountain together and finally saw the sun. I took out a second mortgage on the house to help cover the travel and living expenses the scholarship didn't include. I told the bank it was for kitchen renovations. I told her it was covered by grants. She never knew the difference. When she moved to California, I packed her entire life into 2 suitcases and kissed her forehead so long she laughed. "Mom, you'll see me again next month?" She didn't come home that Christmas. Said she got a job at a media internship and couldn't pass it up. I understood. I sent her a care package with homemade fudge and a knitted scarf. She sent back a photo of herself on the beach. I printed it and stuck it on the fridge. Then came the startup. She called me one night breathless, telling me she was going to launch her own company, a digital media platform that told real stories by real women. Authentic, she kept saying. Honest. Ground level. She was 23 and electric. I emptied my emergency savings to help her get started. Transferred $7,000 into her business account without blinking. Signed papers I didn't fully understand. I just wanted her to fly. She called me her first investor and sent me a thank you letter I kept in my dresser drawer until the ink faded. I didn't need much. Just the occasional call. The random, I love you, Ma. Maybe a surprise visit with coffee and that laugh of hers. But time has a way of making gods out of children, especially the ones who succeed. And slowly, I watched her world grow glossier, polished. Her voice changed. Her outfits hardened. Her words got shorter. The first gala she invited me to, I wore a powder blue dress I'd found on clearance at Macy's. She took one look at me and said, "Oh, Mom, that's a lot of lace." Then she handed me a black blazer and told me to tone it down a little for the photos. That night, she introduced me to a board member as Margaret, the woman who raised me. Not my mom, not my everything, just Margaret. I smiled. Because what else was there to do? On the way home in the back of the car they sent for me, I took off the blazer and laid it across my lap like a folded apology. When I got back to Georgia, I placed that same blazer in the back of my closet. It's still there. Still smells like perfume I couldn't afford. The thank you letter, that's gone. I burned it the day I found out she told a reporter she grew up with nothing but chaos. That's what she called our life. The love, the sacrifice, the hand-sewn costumes and pancakes with powdered sugar. Chaos. I sat on the porch for hours that night listening to the crickets, trying to remember what her voice used to sound like when she said, "Thank you." But it never came back. It didn't happen in a moment. Not the break, not the betrayal. It came like a slow leak in an old pipe, subtle unannounced, until you woke up one morning ankle deep in the cold truth. The first time I really felt it was a Sunday afternoon. She'd come to town for a speaking engagement and agreed to meet me for brunch. I spent 2 days preparing, cleaned the apartment from top to bottom, even though I knew she wouldn't come inside. Ironed the napkins, bought the expensive coffee she liked, the one with the gold foil label. She arrived late. 32 minutes, no apology, just a rushed hug that landed on the side of my shoulder like I was an acquaintance she didn't want to offend. She brought her assistant. "I hope that's okay," she said, already scanning the room for a better table. "We're on a tight schedule." The restaurant I'd chosen was small local suite, the kind of place she used to beg me to take her after ballet practice. French toast and clinking teacups. Back then, we'd sit for hours splitting a cinnamon roll, watching people pass by the windows. Now she ordered egg whites and a black coffee. No cream, no sugar. Her assistant scrolled through emails the whole time. Emily talked about expansion, audience metrics, brand deals. She didn't ask about my blood pressure, didn't ask about the garden or the neighbor who'd passed, or the back porch swing she used to nap on in the summer. She didn't look at me like I was her mother. She looked at me like I was a woman who remembered too much. And when the food came, she barely touched it. Just kept glancing at her phone and nodding along as her assistant whispered names I didn't recognize. "Mom," she said finally, mid-chew, "you should really consider updating your wardrobe. Something more structured would suit you. There are these capsule sets for women your age. Very clean. Minimalist." She said women your age like it was a diagnosis. I smiled, took a bite of my French toast, chewed slow, let the syrup coat the roof of my mouth. I didn't answer. She didn't notice. When the check came, she handed her assistant a platinum card without even looking. No eye contact, no shared joke about how I used to teach her how to calculate tips at the Waffle House. When she stood to leave, she leaned in, kissed my cheek air only, and said, "Let's try to be better at keeping in touch." Okay? Better. As if I'd been the one who disappeared. After they left, I sat there for another hour, ordered a second cup of coffee, watched the door like she might come back. She didn't. I went home and took down the photo of us at her college graduation, the one where she's holding my hand like it's the only thing anchoring her to the world. I didn't throw it away. I just put it in a box. That was the first time I noticed it, the shift. After that, the calls came less often. Texts, too. Short-clipped. "Can't talk now. In a meeting. We'll call later." Later never came. Then the edits started. Subtle things. A profile on her company's founders page listed her as a first-generation entrepreneur. No mention of me. No mention of anyone. When I called and asked about it gently, I thought she said, "It's just branding Mom." People relate more to the solo rise story. It's cleaner. Clean. That word again. I stopped sending her birthday cards after that. Not out of spite, just exhaustion. One night I got a voicemail from her. She sounded distant, distracted. "Hey, Mom, just wanted to say thanks for everything. I know I don't always say it, but I do love you." Okay. Click. That was it. No call back. No "how are you?" I played that voicemail at night sometimes just to hear her voice. I'd listen to it on loop, trying to pull warmth from syllables that had gone cold. Then came the gala. Her company had reached a new funding round. Investors flying in from New York and Dubai. She sent me an invitation through her assistant. Formal attire. Press will be present. I borrowed a dress from a neighbor. Had my hair set at a beauty school downtown cost me $12 and 2 hours of awkward silence. When I arrived, I wasn't on the guest list. I had to show the email on my phone. The woman at the front looked me up and down like I was someone's +1 who'd gotten lost. Inside, the music was loud, the wine expensive. Everyone smelled like wealth. She saw me and came over, arms out, smile ready, but her eyes didn't light up. "Mom, so glad you could make it." She hugged me, then turned immediately to introduce me to someone. "This is Margaret. She's where I started." Where I started. Not who raised me. Not who gave me the first $7,000 that got her through the door. Not who walked her through asthma attacks at midnight and taught her how to fix a leaky sink. Just where she started. Like I was a launch pad, a discarded scaffolding. That night I didn't stay long. I said I was tired, but the truth is, I just didn't want to watch her perform. Didn't want to see her wear a version of herself I didn't recognize. On the way home, I rolled down the window and let the cold air slap my face. It helped. A little. I stopped calling after that. Stopped reaching, because every time I extended a hand, she pulled away with a smile. And I was tired of smiling back like it didn't bruise. The envelope was heavy, thick cream paper with a wax seal on the back, and my name typed in careful serif font. No return address, no handwriting, just Margaret Eleanor Whitlow and my street name. I thought it was an invitation. Maybe another gala, maybe an apology, though I didn't believe in those anymore. But when I opened it, there was no card. No gold lettering or RSVP instructions. Just a letterhead that said, Marston Hale and Burke Legal Counsel to E. Whitlow Media. And under it, a single page. Non-disclosure acknowledgement reminder. It took me a few reads to understand it. The language was coiled tight phrases like per the agreement signed on, and shall refrain from making public statements or representations about. It was dated from the first round of her startup's funding, years ago, when I'd wired her the last of my savings and signed what I thought was a simple shareholder form, something to make her official. Something to show I believed in her, but what I'd signed unknowingly included a clause that barred me from ever speaking publicly about our relationship, about her upbringing, about our history. There was no threat in the letter, not directly, just a gentle legal reminder that this agreement remained in effect. At the bottom, her signature, in digital ink. I stared at that signature for an hour, not because it hurt to see, but because it was the only handwriting I had of hers anymore. Everything else, the cards, the notes, the little love scribbles she used to leave on the fridge, had been packed away or lost in the flood 5 years earlier. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, that she didn't know her lawyers had sent it, that someone had just been cleaning up old files. But that illusion shattered 3 days later. A journalist called, said she was writing a feature on women founders and wanted to include a quote from me. "I know you're her mother," she said warmly. "I just want a sentence or two, something about who she was as a girl. Anything." I was quiet. I asked her what the article was for. She hesitated. "Did you not see the profile? No." She paused, then offered to send it to me. I waited by my computer like a widow waiting for a telegram. When it landed in my inbox, I clicked faster than I should have. My eyes scanned for the betrayal I already felt in my chest. There it was halfway down the page. I came from chaos. I built everything on my own. I didn't have a real family. That was a choice I made early to detach from the noise and raise myself. I stared at that sentence until the screen blurred. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat there wondering what kind of noise I had been. The kind that cooked every meal, packed every lunch, held her through every heartbreak. Was that chaos? Or was it just inconvenient truth? I printed the article, folded it in half, then again, until it was small enough to slip into my coat pocket like a bitter candy. I walked outside down the block to the bench where I used to wait for her school bus. I sat there and read that quote again, over and over. A man walking his dog paused in front of me, said hello. I smiled and nodded, but my mouth felt strange, unfamiliar, like a guest I hadn't invited. When I went back home, I stood in front of the hall mirror and looked at myself the way a stranger might. This was the woman she'd erased. She'd rewritten her origin story so cleanly, so publicly, that I felt like a fictional character in someone else's novel. I walked into the guest room, hers, and opened the closet. It still held the dress she wore to prom, still smelled faintly of vanilla lotion and hope. I took it down and folded it carefully, put it in the same box with the photo, the thank you letter, and a few other pieces I couldn't throw away. Then I slid the box onto the top shelf and shut the closet door. I didn't want to see it anymore. 2 days later, I responded to the legal letter. Just a sentence. Acknowledged. No sincerely. No best. Just the one word. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The silence was complete now. Not just personal, professional. Legal. She had made it official I didn't exist. Not in her story, not in her empire, not in the myth she sold to investors and fans. I was a liability, a loose thread she'd clipped. That night I sat on the edge of my bed and thought about the first time she said "Mama." It was raining. She was just starting to walk, one hand on the coffee table, the other outstretched like a little bird testing wind. She looked up at me, grinned with her whole face, and said it. "Mama." So proud. So sure. I didn't know it would be the first word she'd ever try to take back. But now I understood. And I believed her. She didn't have a mother. Not anymore. She hadn't touched the toast. It sat on the plate between us, cold and curling at the edges like even bread knew when it was unwelcome. She stared at it the way she used to stare at vegetables, eyes flat, uninterested, waiting for it to go away. I didn't say a word. She shifted in the chair legs, crossed tightly, arms wrapped around her like a child in trouble. She'd taken off her shoes at the door without asking. That irritated me more than it should have. But it wasn't the gesture, it was the comfort in it. Like she still thought she belonged here. "This is temporary," she said. "I just need a few days to breathe. You don't even have to talk to me if you don't want to." I nodded once. Let her hear the silence. Outside, the wind knocked softly against the windows. September in Georgia, warm days, cool nights. I'd left the back door cracked for air. The smell of pine and clay drifted through. It smelled like the earth before a storm. She used to say it was her favorite smell. "Smells like home," she'd whisper from the back seat as we drove home from church. She hadn't said that in years. "I know I messed up," she said quietly. "I know I hurt you." She was trying. I saw that, but it was rehearsed. She was giving me the version she thought I wanted, the script that played well. The humility she'd probably practiced in the mirror of some luxury hotel bathroom. I turned my head and looked at her. Fully. Let the full weight of my eyes settle on her face. The lines that had deepened. The tiredness. The fear. I didn't want to see it, but I did. "Do you remember what you said in that interview?" I asked. Her mouth pressed flat. "Mom?" "No," I said. My voice was steady. "I want to hear you say it. Out loud." She looked away. The exact words I said. "Say them." She swallowed. Her hands clenched together on her lap. "I said, I came from chaos." "Go on." "I said I didn't have a real family, that I raised myself." I let the silence expand, fill every corner of the kitchen like floodwater. "Did you believe it when you said it?" I asked. She looked down. "No. I mean, I don't know. Maybe part of me did. Back then. Why I was angry," she said. I felt watched, judged. I was trying to make my own name, and it felt like dragging my past behind me was making it harder. I needed to be clean, unattached. That word again. Clean. "So you made me dirty?" I asked. She flinched. "I never asked you for credit," I said. "Never once. Not for the money, not for the nights I didn't sleep, not for the years I lived in silence while you became someone I didn't recognize. But what you did, what you said, that wasn't just forgetting, that was erasure." "I know," she whispered. "No," I said. "I don't think you do." She looked up. Tears finally reaching the edge of her eyes. "I do now." "Do you?" She stood suddenly moved around the table and knelt in front of me. Her hands gripped my knees like a prayer. "Please, just let me stay here." "Just for a while. I have nowhere else. Everyone's turned their back on me." I looked down at her, the girl I raised, the woman who disowned me. She was crying now, tears sliding down her cheeks, not performative, not rehearsed. Real. And still I didn't reach for her. "I read that profile 100 times," I said softly, trying to find myself in it. Even just a shadow, a trace of who we used to be. She shook her head. "I was wrong." "You were deliberate," I corrected. "That's different." She rested her forehead against my knees. I could feel her breath through the fabric of my jeans. She smelled like old perfume and sweat. Panic has a scent. I knew it well. "You can sleep on the couch," I said. "One night?" She looked up, eyes wide. Hope bloomed too fast, too greedy. "But in the morning we'll talk about where you go next," I added. "This isn't a return. It's a pause. That's all." Her face crumpled. "And I need to be clear about something I said. I am not your safety net. Not anymore. You cut those ties. You made your story clean. You don't get to come back and act like the mess you left behind is still willing to hold you." "I'm not asking for all that," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "You are." She stood up slowly, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater. Her hands trembled. "I don't know who I am without all of it," she said. "The company, the attention, the story I built." I nodded. "Then I guess you finally get to find out." I stood, walked past her, and opened the linen closet, pulled out a single blanket, a pillow, set them on the armrest of the couch without ceremony. She didn't follow me. She stayed rooted to the kitchen tile like she wasn't sure what would happen next. I turned off the light behind me as I left the room. She didn't say goodnight. I didn't either. The next morning I woke early. The sun was just brushing through the blinds in faint ribbons. I stood at the threshold of the living room and watched her sleep, curled tight on the couch like a child. The blanket slipped down to her knees in the night. I could see the edge of the tattoo she got at 19, a crescent moon on her ankle. She used to say it made her feel fearless. I walked to the kitchen, made my tea, and stared out the window at the garden. When I heard her stir, I didn't look back. I just said I wrote down some names. "There's a women's shelter downtown with transitional housing. They can help. You'll need to be out by noon." She didn't argue. Not this time. She left the pillow folded neatly on the couch, smoothed the blanket out as if she hadn't spent the night curled inside it like something trying not to break. She stood in the hallway for a long time, looking toward the guest room door. It hadn't opened once. She didn't ask. I watched her from the kitchen, sipping my tea wrapped in the shawl my sister knit before her hands gave out. The silence between us wasn't cruel. It was full, settled. The kind that comes after a long storm when the branches stop moving, but the air still smells like something's been changed. She turned and met my eyes. No smile, no apology. "I understand," she said. I nodded. She stepped closer, slow, like someone testing the strength of a frozen lake. "I just wanted to say, I didn't come here to fix anything." "Good," I said soft. "Because that's not yours to fix." She looked down at her hands. The same hands I used to guide through cursive, through tying shoelaces, through prayer. Now they trembled just a little, age and consequence showing their edge. I thought if I could just come home, she started, then stopped herself. But I see now. This isn't home anymore. It's yours. That hit me harder than I expected. Not because it was cruel, but because it was finally true. She had stopped calling it home long before the money, long before the lawsuits and the press and the rewritten past. She left when she stopped asking how I was, when she stopped being able to sit in silence with me and still feel seen. "You'll land on your feet," I said. She nodded, eyes glassy but unspilled. She pulled her phone from her coat pocket, hesitated, and then slid it back in. "I was going to ask if I could call sometime. But maybe I shouldn't." "You can," I said, "if you're calling as a person, not as a product." Her mouth twitched. Almost a smile. "I don't know who that person is yet," she said. "Then figure it out," I said. "But don't bring your confusion into my peace." She walked to the door, picked up her duffel, and stood for a moment with her hand on the knob. Her shoulders drooped like she'd aged 10 years overnight. She looked around one last time. At the rug. The photos that weren't there. The quiet space that had once been filled with her voice. "Thank you," she said. "Not Mama. Not Mom. Just thank you." And I was okay with that. I didn't walk her out. Didn't watch her get into the rideshare or make sure she got into the car safe. She'd built a life where I didn't belong. I wasn't going to force myself into the ending of it. I sat at the table and finished my tea. Then I opened the back door and stepped outside barefoot. The grass was damp, the sun barely pushing through the tree line. The garden was still untouched. My tomatoes were nearly ready, fat, red, stubborn. I crouched and touched the soil. Rich. Warm. Exactly what it needed to be. Later that day, I went back inside and opened the guest room closet. The box was still there, the one with her prom dress, the faded photos, the thank you letter I hadn't read in years. I didn't take anything out. I just stood and looked. Not with nostalgia, but with quiet ownership. That box belonged to me now. Not as a shrine. Not as proof. But as a record. Of who I was. Of what I gave. Of what survived. That night I lit a single candle. The kind she used to say made the house smell like gingerbread. I set it by the sink and watched the flame until it steadied. I didn't feel triumphant. Just clear. No more waiting. No more wondering if the phone would ring. She had left, and I had stayed, and not just in this house. In myself. The next morning I did something I hadn't done in years. I slept in. Not out of indulgence, but because I didn't feel like there was anything I needed to prove. For decades, my days started before sunrise, packing lunches, cleaning bathrooms, sewing buttons back on jackets too worn to replace. Then later, after she'd left, I filled the mornings with noise. I scrubbed cabinets that didn't need it, polished brass that never dulled, listened to the news just to feel voices in the room. But that morning I woke late, made a full breakfast, and ate it slowly. No rush, no one to impress. The quiet didn't ache anymore. It hummed. I took the laundry down from the line behind the house, warm from the sun, smelling of soap and air. I folded each towel carefully, smoothing every corner. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because it was mine to do, and no one was going to see it, judge it, or call it background noise. Later I walked the perimeter of my yard. Ran my hand along the fence Robert built before he passed. He always said the knots in the wood gave it character. I used to joke that was just his excuse for doing a sloppy job, but now, I saw the beauty in things made imperfectly, made by hand, made with care that didn't need praise. My neighbor saw me from her porch and waved. I waved back. That was enough. I passed the dogwood tree Emily planted when she was 9. It had grown wild roots pushing up the brick path in small, slow rebellions. Every spring it bloomed so bright it made you squint. I stood beneath it and let a few early leaves fall into my hands. Let them sit there. Light. Honest. I was beginning to understand something I never had room to before I could live without her. I had been living without her even when she was still calling herself mine. There had been years where she was in the room but absent. Present on holidays but emotionally miles away, scrolling her phone while I told stories she no longer found valuable. And here I was, still standing, still cooking, still laughing sometimes at my own bad jokes, still humming when I swept the floor. There was strength in that, not the loud kind, not the kind that earns applause, but the kind that stays, the kind that folds sheets with care even when no one's visiting, the kind that keeps tomatoes watered and the porch swept. In the afternoon, I got a call from the church. They needed someone to help prep for the fall fair. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. I pulled out my apron from the drawer, the one with the faint grease stain and embroidery worn thin, and packed my tote bag with measuring spoons Tupperware and the recipe card for lemon bars written in my mother's hand. I hadn't volunteered in a long time. For a while, everything I gave felt like it disappeared into a void. But that day, I felt like maybe I could offer something again, something honest, something unedited. Not out of obligation, just offering. The way wind offers breath to the trees. That night I lit another candle. Not gingerbread this time. Something soft woodsy. I sat in my chair by the window, my knitting in my lap, and let the quiet stretch wide again. There was a voicemail from Emily. I listened to it without emotion, without leaning forward. Hi, it's me. I got into the shelter. They're helping. I just wanted you to know I'm okay. And thanks again. I won't call for a while. I think it's better that way. That was it. I didn't replay it. I didn't cry. I simply deleted it. She was surviving now somewhere else. That was enough. I didn't need redemption from her. I didn't need her to write me back into the version of her story that had gone viral. I didn't even need her to say mama again. I had been all those things Mother Supporter Foundation, and I had been erased. But I was still here, still full of stories, still growing. I got up, washed the dishes, and placed the candle back in the cabinet, and as I passed by the hallway, I paused outside the guest room. Not for long, just enough to place my hand on the doorknob, then let go. The door stayed shut, and that finally felt right. I pulled out the photo albums a few days later, not out of longing I'd moved past that, but out of something quieter, a kind of reckoning. I wanted to see what was really there, not just what had been lost. I wanted to remind myself I hadn't made it up, the joy, the sweat, the years, that my life hadn't just been a footnote in someone else's fiction. I sat cross-legged on the rug, 2 albums cracked open across my knees. The plastic sleeves had yellowed in places and some corners had curled, like they were trying to retreat from memory. But the faces were all there, smiling, blinking in sunlight, caught mid-laugh, mid-sneeze, mid-run. There was one photo I stared at longer than the rest. Emily at 13, grinning through braces, holding a science fair ribbon in one hand and a carton of orange juice in the other. Her shirt was stained with paint. Her ponytail was crooked. And behind her, just barely visible, was my hand on her shoulder. Only the edge of my sleeve made it into the frame, I remembered that day. She'd been terrified of speaking in front of the judges. I'd sat on the floor of the school library with her for 2 hours the night before, pretending to be the audience, asking her every question I could think of. And that morning, when she finally stepped up to the display board, her voice cracked on the first sentence. But she kept going. She didn't win first place. But she didn't run off stage either. That ribbon had lived on our fridge for a year. I ran my fingers down the plastic sleeve. I didn't feel pain. Not exactly. Just space. The kind that memory carves when it no longer owns you. I flipped to the next page. Halloween 1998. She was a pirate that year, not the pink kind, the rough kind. One eye blacked out, a fake parrot duct taped to her shoulder. I'd stayed up 2 nights sewing her vest. She insisted I draw a scar across her cheek with my eyeliner pencil. She was fierce that night. Not pretty. Not polite. Just fierce. That photo made me smile. For real. In the corner of the page was one of me holding her hand as we walked down our old neighborhood, the back of my head, her tiny fingers tucked into mine like a secret. That's the thing about being the one who documents. You're rarely in the photos, but your fingerprints are everywhere. I closed the album and breathed. Deep. It was mine now. The story. Not hers to erase. Not hers to monetize or shrink into an anecdote for some curated podcast about overcoming. She could tell whatever version she wanted to her audience. But I knew the truth. I lived it. I bled for it. And now I reclaimed it. Later that week, I went to the local community center. They'd posted a flyer asking for volunteers to help digitize archives, photos, family stories, audio interviews. I showed up early, brought a thermos of coffee and a worn notebook. The woman running the project asked if I had any stories to share. I told her too many to count. She smiled. Start with one. So I did. Not the one about betrayal. Not yet. I told her about the time I walked 3 miles in a thunderstorm because Emily had forgotten her dance shoes. She needed them for her recital. I showed up soaked shoes in hand and sat in the back row dripping onto the gym floor while she twirled in the spotlight. She didn't look at me once that night. But when we got home, she wrapped her arms around my waist and whispered, "You came." That was the story I gave. It felt good to give it. Later they let me record it, my voice telling the memory. No edits, no filters, just truth. That weekend I baked lemon bars for the church fair. The same recipe my mother passed to me when I was 18. The index card was soft with age, stained in one corner with a splash of vanilla. I didn't tweak it. Didn't add anything modern. Some things don't need revision. As I stood at my little booth handing out squares on napkins to families and strangers, I felt something I hadn't in years. Present. Not remembered, not referenced. Present. People asked for the recipe, complimented the texture. Some asked if I was Emily Whitlow's mother, and I'd nod politely but steer the conversation elsewhere. Not because I was ashamed, but because that wasn't the most interesting thing about me anymore. She was a chapter, a loud one, but not the whole book. When the fair ended and the tables were folded, I stayed to help sweep the crumbs and fold the plastic chairs. One of the teens from the youth group asked if I could teach them how to bake the bars next time. I said yes. That night I walked home in the cool dark, the stars out in full no clouds to dim their shine. I thought of her where she might be, whether she was sitting on another couch asking another person for forgiveness she hadn't earned. But I didn't carry it with me. I had enough to carry. And finally, none of it was hers. Autumn settled in slow that year, the kind of slow that makes you believe maybe change can be kind sometimes. Leaves gave up their green one soft blush at a time, not all at once. Even the wind seemed gentle, like it understood the house had already endured enough storms. I found myself setting the table again, not for anyone, just for me. A small bowl of soup, a cloth napkin, sometimes a candle. No reason, no ritual, just presence. For years, I'd only used the good plates when Emily came to visit. Even after things went cold, I kept them boxed up like they were waiting for a future that never arrived. But one afternoon, I pulled them down, washed them, set one out beside a heavy mug and a clean fork, and I ate there alone in the stillness of my own ceremony. It felt like communion. I started noticing little things again. The sound of the radiator humming to life in the morning, the way the cat next door pawed at the garden gate like she owned the place. I'd forgotten how much life lived quietly in the corners. One night I had a dream. Emily was little again, maybe 4, running through the backyard with no shoes on, arms out, hair wild. She was laughing. That laugh that came from deep in her belly, the one that used to make me cry just hearing it. In the dream, she ran up to me, held out a dandelion, and said, "This one won't die if you keep it." I woke with tears already dried on my face. I didn't try to interpret it. Some memories are just echoes, not warnings, not promises, just pieces of what was. A week later, I got a letter. A real one, stamped, addressed in her handwriting. I knew it before I opened it, the way a mother knows the sound of her child's cry even years later. I carried it to the kitchen, made tea, sat down. I didn't rush to open it. I let it sit there a while, the weight of it warming under my palm like a living thing. Eventually, I slid my finger under the seal and unfolded the paper. It was short. Mom, I'm in a place now where I can see it. Not just what I did, but what I broke. I don't expect anything. I don't even know what I'm hoping for. Just that maybe someday you'll remember me as more than what I became. I remember everything. I hope you're okay. Emily. I read it once, then again. Then I folded it and placed it in the drawer with the recipe cards. Not with the old photos, not with the thank you letter or the prom dress. Something new, something unfinished. I didn't cry, but I did feel something shift, not forgiveness, not grief. Just a loosening, like a window cracked after a long season of keeping everything locked up. I wrote back 3 days later. Not a letter. A postcard. I remember you as my daughter, and I remember myself as your mother. We are both more than what happened, but that doesn't mean we go back. I'm okay. I hope you will be too. I didn't sign it. I didn't send a return address. Just dropped it in the mailbox at the corner of Maple and 3rd, the one with the dent on the side where the truck backed into it 10 years ago. It was enough. She'd know it came from me. After that, I went back to my days. The steady rhythm of an ordinary life, volunteering on Tuesdays, baking on Fridays, watering the garden in the cool light of dawn. I learned to make sourdough, though the first few loaves came out dense as bricks. I laughed at myself for that, out loud. I started sitting on the front porch again, wrapped in the quilt my mother made me. I'd sit there just after dinner watching the sun set behind the trees, sipping lukewarm tea, listening to the world wind itself down. Sometimes I'd catch my own reflection in the window face, soft-lined familiar in a way it hadn't been in years. And sometimes just for a second I'd imagine her sitting next to me. Not the version who left. Not the woman on magazine covers with a manicured smile and a microphone, but the girl in pigtails who used to ask me if we could keep fireflies in a jar forever. I didn't push the thought away. I let her sit there in my mind in peace. But when I got up to go inside, I left her there on the porch, where she belonged, where she was still beautiful, where she didn't have to explain anything. The first frost came late that year. October leaned warm into November like it wasn't quite ready to let go. I didn't mind. It gave the tomatoes more time, gave me more mornings with bare feet on the porch hot mug and hand breath just beginning to curl in the air. I found the old cassette player while cleaning out the hall closet. Covered in dust, heavy as sin. It used to live in Emily's room back when she'd record bedtime stories in her own voice and play them as she fell asleep. I'd forgotten it was still in the house. There were still tapes inside. I brought it into the kitchen, wiped it down, sat at the table, and pressed play. At first it was just static. Then her voice. Small. High. 6 years old. Mama, this is my story. Once upon a time, there was a girl who wanted to fly. I froze. Her little voice filled the room, soft and stuttering, every R pronounced like a W. It wasn't polished, wasn't clean. She tripped over her own words, giggled, started again. I closed my eyes and listened. It was all there. Not the myth she sold to investors. Not the hardened narrative with its clean break from chaos. Just her messy, imaginative loved. Talking to herself in the dark, trying to become. When the tape ended, I sat there for a long time, the player silent between my hands. Then I pressed rewind. I didn't know why I kept it all these years. Maybe because I never wanted to forget the sound of her hope. But now I realized it wasn't mine to keep anymore. I placed the player in a bag, added a few other things, the thank you letter, a copy of the prom photo, one of the lace napkins from her childhood birthday parties. Not to return, not to offer, just to release. I drove to the community center, walked to the donation counter, handed over the bag, and said, "These belong to someone trying to remember who they were. If she ever asks for them, give them to her." The woman at the counter looked confused but nodded. "We'll keep it safe." I left without looking back. On the drive home, I didn't feel empty. I felt light. The past doesn't stop holding you until you decide to put it down. And I'd carried it long enough. Carried her laugh, her silence, her erasure, all of it like a second skin. I got home and walked to the garden. The last of the tomatoes had split on the vine. I picked them anyway, cut away the cracks, saved what was sweet, made sauce that night, ate it alone barefoot in the kitchen, letting the steam fog the window. The phone rang once. Unknown number. I let it ring. I didn't need to answer every call just because it came from the past. That night I opened the closet in the guest room one more time. The prom dress was still there. The shoes, too. But I didn't touch them. I just stood in the doorway and whispered a small goodbye, not to Emily, to the version of myself who had lived in waiting, the woman who curled her worth around someone else's success. She didn't live here anymore. I closed the door and turned off the light. I lay in bed that night with the window open. The air was sharp, clean. It smelled like endings and something just beginning. I thought about all the things I'd passed down without even realizing. Recipes, phrases, the way I rest one hand on the counter when I think, the way I hum when I'm afraid. She had all of that in her now, whether she acknowledged it or not. My voice lived in her spine, my care in her instinct, my sacrifice in the foundation she stands on, even if she never speaks my name again. And I didn't need credit. I didn't need applause. I just needed peace. I'd built a life, grown it with my hands, repaired it with silence. And now I was learning how to sit inside it. Alone, whole. The first snow didn't fall until mid-December. It was light, just a dusting, the kind that disappears by noon, but leaves a hush over everything. I watched it from the porch, wrapped in my mother's old wool shawl, the air sharp on my cheeks. The pine branches dipped slightly under the weight, as if bowing in reverence to the cold. I used to hate this time of year. Holidays have a way of exposing everything that isn't there. The empty chair, the unsent card, the phone that doesn't ring. But that winter felt different. Not easier, just clearer. There were no expectations this time, no rehearsed joy, no boxes waiting at the door or plans rearranged to accommodate a daughter who never showed. It was quiet. And for once, the quiet didn't feel like punishment. I lit a candle for my sister, another for Robert, then one more just for myself. Not for mourning, for gratitude, for the breath in my lungs, for the walls around me, for the tomatoes that fed me and the hands that never stopped making something out of nothing. At the church potluck, they asked me to bring the lemon bars again. I brought 3 trays. They were gone before the pastor even finished grace. One of the little girls asked me how I got them so soft, and I told her, "Never rush the butter. Let it breathe." She nodded like I'd just handed her a secret worth keeping. They started calling me Miss Maggie. It stuck. Sometimes the kids would come by the community kitchen just to help me prep cracking eggs with too much force, measuring flour like it was glitter. I let them make messes. I let them laugh with their mouths full. No one asked me about Emily anymore. And when they did, I simply said, "She's finding her way." It wasn't a lie. It was just the only version of the truth that didn't hurt anymore. She hadn't written again. No more letters, no calls, no updates. And I didn't look her up. Whatever was unfolding in her world, it wasn't mine to carry. That was the boundary. And for once it held. I went to the library more, started borrowing memoirs, women who'd survived harder things than I had, women who rebuilt lives out of splinters. I kept a little notebook and jotted down lines that stuck with me. One of them read, "You are not a chapter in someone else's book. You are the whole damn novel." I wrote it on an index card and taped it to the fridge. On Christmas Eve, I had dinner with my neighbors. Ham, scalloped potatoes, green beans with too much butter. We pulled crackers and wore paper crowns. Someone turned on music from the 60s, and we all sang off-key laughing like we'd known each other longer than we had. When I got home, I poured a small glass of wine and sat by the window. No tree this year. Just a small wreath and a string of lights draped across the mantel. Simple still. I pulled the old journal from the drawer, the one I started after she left. The pages were warped from tea stains and time. Some of the ink had blurred from my own tears. I flipped through the entries, pausing here and there. March 12th. She hasn't called. I don't think she ever will. I don't know who I am without her needing me. Then October 2nd, planted onions today. They'll keep through the frost. Everything else dies back. But not these. And most recently, November 14th. Woke up and didn't feel hollow. Not full, but steady. I didn't write anything new that night. Just closed the cover and held it for a while. Like a mirror. Like proof. I looked around the house, small, lived-in soft around the edges, and saw a life that fit me now. Not built for guests. Not waiting for anyone. Just mine. The walls held no photos of her anymore. But not because I hated her. Because I didn't need the reminder. I knew what I gave. I knew who I'd been. She had taken the story and reshaped it for the world. And I had taken the silence she left behind and grown something inside it. Something sturdy. One morning in January, I got a card in the mail. No return address. Just a sketch of a bird on the front. Inside blank. But on the back, in small, neat handwriting, I'm still listening. I didn't need to ask who it was from. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Because this quiet, this home, this body that finally belonged only to me was not a waiting room anymore. I was not a door to be reopened when the world grew too dark. I was a life, and I had things to do. I woke on my birthday to a sunrise that bled gold across the ceiling. It was the kind of light that made you believe something was trying to start over, even if the day itself didn't ask for it. 63. No candles, no balloons. Just the sound of wind through the pine and the kettle boiling soft and steady. I didn't expect anything. Not cards. Not calls. And so when the knock came 3 short taps, I froze. I opened the door to a courier. Young man, barely 20, looking apologetic in the early light. "Miss Whitlow?" "Yes. Got a delivery here." "Signature, please." I took the box. Plain square, heavier than it looked. No return label. He was gone before I could ask. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table. Stared at it a long time before slicing the tape. Inside one thick envelope. A smaller box. And a handwritten note. I picked up the note last. Folded once clean edges. For everything I never said. For what I stole. I don't expect a reply. But if you ever wonder, yes, I knew. You were the ground under every step I took. I'm sorry I treated you like dirt. E. The envelope held legal documents, shares apparently, transferred ownership of something called Echo and Fire, a holding company small, her last piece of something she hadn't sold or lost. She'd signed over the whole thing, a gesture, not an empire. The smaller box held a locket. It wasn't gold, not real, just plated. I recognized it from when she was 15. She'd saved allowance money for weeks to buy it at a thrift shop downtown. Back then, it held a tiny picture of her and her best friend crammed into a photo booth. Now, it held 2 scraps of paper, one folded so tightly it took me a full minute to unfold. It was the note I'd written in her lunchbox every Monday of her 1st grade year. I used to scribble them on old receipts when we were out of paper. She'd pretended not to care, said it was embarrassing, but I kept writing them anyway. This one read, "Don't forget you're loved even on your worst days." The second scrap was her kindergarten drawing. Me in a blue dress holding her hand. She had drawn herself with wings. I stared at both for a long time. Then I closed the locket and set it aside. Not out of rejection, but because some things don't need to be worn anymore. I didn't call her, didn't send a thank you. I didn't rush to assign meaning. Gifts aren't confessions. They aren't reconciliation. Sometimes they're just the sound of someone who finally heard their own echo. I walked out into the garden. Cold air on my arms, soil still soft from the night frost. The rosemary had grown wild, twisting out of its pot, reaching like it had somewhere better to be. I trimmed it back. That night I made stew, left the front porch light off. No reason to leave it on anymore. and after dinner I wrote the last line in my journal. Some things return. Others are returned. But peace is what stays. I placed the journal in the top drawer, turned off the kitchen light, moved through the house without hesitation. No ghosts, no shadows, no weight that wasn't mine. Just me. Here. Still. Some treasures had been recovered. Others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better. Harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.